Today we're going to do the fall of Rome and the rise of the Normans and Saxons. And I know that you guys have I know we went over probably most of this in class, but I'm going to read through the whole thing. For those of you that have forgotten, a quick brush up. You can always skip ahead in the video to where you remember us being. So we are going to just run through this. So Rome falls in Britain. During the 5th century, so the years 400 and 500, remember, if it says 5th century, it means the years before that, the Roman Empire withdrew from Britain, and they really started to leave in 406 to 407. The Anglo-Saxons. The Saxons came from North Germany who migrated to the island of Britain around the year 405. There were 3 groups of people that are lumped together with the Anglo-Saxons. These are the Saxons, Angles, and the Jutes. After they moved to Britain, they became known under the Anglo-Saxons. Eventually, the name Angles became the word for the English, which is how England got its name. The kingdoms. From the years 550 to 1066, they were the dominant people on the island. At first, the land was divided up into many small kingdoms, but eventually certain kingdoms began to overtake other small ones. The first kingdom to overtake others was called Northumbria. This happened in the early 600s, which was settled in the north by the Angles. In the year 700, the kingdom of Mercia rose to power. In the year 800s, the kingdom of Wessex conquered the land. The King of Wessex was at this time considered the King of England. So Wessex. King Egbert conquered the last kingdom, which was known as Mercia, and annexed their land. So annexed means that it became part of his. Wessex continued to do well under Egbert and his successors, and reached its height under Alfred the Great. Social order. At the top of the social order were the kings. Below them were the thanes. The thanes were powerful men who owned land and reported to the king. They could have influence over who was king and what the king did. And then below the thanes were the free men called churls. And then at the bottom of this social order were the slaves. Some of these people were captured in battle, but others were people who could not pay their debts, and neither of these two people had rights. Laws and government. The Saxon king did not rule by himself. He had a council of thanes and bishops who helped him rule. This council was called the Witan or Wittenagemot. They advised the king, keeping him from abusing his power, and would sometimes even elect the new king. They choose the new one. The laws were very primitive. They varied from physical punishment such as losing a hand or various fines. They had a legacy. The Anglo-Saxon rule came to an end with the Norman conquest of 1066, and I have included a sheet, not a sheet, but I will show you guys later what I'm talking about. It's how the different kingdoms were split up and which different families were in charge at different points of the era. And so many of the borders of shires and towns that were created by the Saxons are still used today. The Normans. The Normans originally lived in Normandy, which is a part of France. In 1066, a large army sailed to England. They were led by William, Duke of Normandy. They defeated the English at the Battle of Hastings, and eventually William conquered all of England and became King of England, and his nickname was William the Conqueror. Once they'd conquered, they had some of the women of England use their skills in embroidery to make a set of pictures called the Bayeux Tapestry. This tapestry tells us the reasons for the Normans' reasons for conquering England, and it tells us also about the Battle of Hastings. The pictures were then sewed onto strips of cloth and joined together to make a very long strip. When it was finished, they took it to Normandy and hung it up in the Bayeux Cathedral. It went nearly all the way around the walls. Most Normans could not read, but it was like a comic strip, which, without words, which made it very easy for them to understand. It was a symbol of pride for the Normans. It starts with a picture of Edward the Confessor, who was the King of England from 1042 AD to 1066. Edward is seen sending a man named Harold to Normandy on a friendly diplomatic trip. Other pictures show that Harold and William became friends. Alright, so remember, William is the current ruler of Normandy, and Edward is the current ruler of England. And so Edward says to his friend Harold, okay, I want you to go over to France. I want you to become friends with this guy named William. And so that's exactly what Harold does. Harold at this time, though, does make a promise to serve and obey William for the rest of his life. Then Edward dies, and Harold becomes the new king. This upsets William because he is under the belief that he was to be the new king of England. The next part shows William gathering his army and setting sail for England. It ends with the battle and William's victory. It also shows the end of King Harold, who was shot in the battle with an arrow, as well as it looks like he was killed in about 3 different ways. It was not a good thing. Alright, they had lots of different opinions about William. A Norman monk said William was the wisest, most generous ruler in the world. He was fearless in danger. He spoke well and was good at getting people to agree with him. An English monk, however, did not like William nearly as much. He said, stern with people who tried to go against his wishes. No one dared to upset him because he could be so violent. He had rich men put in chains for disobeying his orders. People who lived under William had a very hard time, and they suffered a lot. The Domesday Book. The Normans split England up into different parts. William kept parts for himself while he let churches have other parts, and what was left was for his wealthiest followers. These men were called barons. The barons built castles to keep themselves safe from attacks. They were worried about the English as well as attacks from each other. Each baron then let his friends build houses in the villages throughout their lands. There would be one Norman family for each village, and they would be the lords and ladies, and they would be in charge of the village and manor. A manor included the lord's house and land and the neighboring village. In 1086, William decided to find out as much as he could about England. He wanted to know about the villages, farms, and other things like mines and forest. He wanted to know who owned each patch of land and what was on it and what it was worth, kind of like a census. According to an English monk, William's men went to every county and found out its size and land and cattle William owned there, or how much the people ought to pay him in tax every year. They also found out how much land his followers owned and how much everyone else possessed in land or cattle. He had done it so carefully that they noted every patch of land, however small, and every ox, cow, or pig. They compiled so much information that William had a book created for each county, and soon after William's death in 1087 AD, they were made into huge books which are known as the Domesday Book. This is an excellent first-hand source of what life was like in England in the 1100s, as well as the Bayeux Tapestry. So this is the part that I know we definitely didn't get to in class. After William the Conqueror. So there were 3 Norman kings that ruled England and Wales after William I. First, there was his eldest son, who was also named William, so William II. Second was his younger son, Henry. So William had 2 sons. His first son was named William as well, and his second son was named Henry. And they both became king at some point. And then one of them had a son named Stephen. I think it was Henry. We're going to say Henry. So Henry had a son named Stephen, who became the 3rd king. It is important to note that none of these kings conquered Scotland. Scotland had its own hierarchy of kings, but eventually Scotland and England did become united when a Scottish princess married Henry. If you remember, William and the Normans were from France, which means when they came to England, they brought their language with them. This influenced it added words to the English language. For example, so the Normans learned the English names for farm animals, but they stuck to their Norman or French words for them when they were eating the animals. So if I say there is a cow, okay, that cow is the English word, but beef or woof is the Norman or the French word. Sheep is the English word. Mutton is the English equivalent of the French word. And then pig, pork. They also brought new ideas about laws and government. The Domesday Book is an example of the careful way that they ruled. This care still affects the way things are done. For example, the Norman French words, le reine le veut, the queen desires it, still appears on some official documents. And after the reign of the Normans came the House of Blois. And we will be talking a little bit more about them, but I will show you guys, if you guys have watched the the video of me explaining all the different assignments for this week, you guys will see what I'm talking about.